All right. Hello, you guys. I'm sorry that I am not at school today, but I am getting some extra training on how to do some things in the classroom. But what I wanted to do is create a video to explain the slides that Mr. Barker is showing you guys. So that way you know some of the things that I think is important for you to know. So this is my first time doing this like this, so we're going to see how it goes. But what I would like for Mr. Barker to do is to go ahead and pause me for right now, and then go ahead and open the Google Slides presentation. Don't put it into present mode because I want to make sure that you can unpause me to be able to let me talk about each slide as we get to them. So I will have Mr. Barker go ahead and pause as we get the Google Slides presentation up and ready. Okay, so we are starting on slide number 19, which is rock layers. So this is the first part of a new introduction into our History of Planet Earth unit. So we have talked already about Earth's layers, the crust, the mantle, the core, kind of the importance of those three, how they fit together. We've spent quite a bit of time talking about that. So now we're going to talk about rock layers, and most important out of this is sedimentary rocks, how are rocks formed, how can we tell how old they are, and then the law of superposition, which helps us remember that the oldest rocks are on the bottom and then the newest ones are on top. So at this point, you should have already seen the sedimometer or sedimentameter. Miss Henry and I joke because we both have trouble pronouncing that. So we're going to go to the next slide, which is slide number 20. Sedimentary rock makes up most of the Earth's crust and is made from sediment. And sediment is broken down pieces of rock and other solid materials that settle to the bottom of a liquid. So what basically happens is if you looked at the sedimentameter, I think that's the correct word, the heavier pieces will sink to the bottom. And then as they sink to the bottom and stay there, and heavier pieces sink down on top of it, it kind of compacts itself and makes the loose particles into solid pieces. So sediment is often dirt and rock particles, which means they're small little pieces that settle at the bottom of bodies of water. But it also talks about any solid material that settles to the bottom of the liquid. So on this slide, you see the glass of water. But with the sedimentameter, we have some gravel, some sand, and even just particles of dirt and stuff that's still in there. All right, so the next slide. Now the rock layer, sedimentary rock is formed over many years. And so as you look at this example of this rock, you can see the lines where basically this rock has grown. What are some ways do you think that this rock came to be? I'm going to let you guys take a second and let Mr. Barker pause me, and you guys talk as a table group. What are some ways that you think that this sedimentary rock could have even created? Okay, so now that you guys have talked and had a chance to share out, remember our definition of sediment. Remember that these rocks are formed by having stuff lay on top of each other. So you're going to have I'm trying to think of an easier way to explain it. If I were to have, let me grab the sedimentameter real quick. Now, this is what it looks like right now. And I'm going to just show this. This is what it looks like right now. I actually shook this up on Friday, and then I set this down in my windowsill. And on Friday when we left, or when I shook this up, you can even see like this brown. And after we get through today's lesson in both classes, we're going to let it sit for a while, and we're going to see if this light brown part will even be clear. Now, all of the stuff that's in here is not, it's not disappearing. It's not going anywhere. It's staying inside of here. But as it sits, it starts to pull down, and all of your weight starts to pull down, and things start to get heavier. And the longer that it sits there and the more that's piled on, the more compact compacted it's going to be. I try to think of it like if you are at the beach and there's sand. Sand a little bit by itself is pretty light. It's not very heavy. But when you start to get sand and you add water to it and you keep piling wet sand upon wet sand upon wet sand, it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And that's how sedimentary rocks are created. It's just pieces of rock that are just pressed into each other, and that's how it continues to grow from the top. So that goes into the law of superposition. It's anything that's compiled on top of it and then lets it build. That's why your oldest part of the rock is on the bottom. The newest part of the rock is on the top. Okay. And now I'm going to go back into the Google slide. And we are on slide number 22. Sediments are deposited usually by water. Sediments build up in layers. This is a process called sedimentation. Sediments are compacted as the weight of the sediments on top squash the sediments at the bottom. Sediments are cemented by crystals of salt that are left after the water has been squeezed out of the rocks. So when it's talking about sediments that are deposited usually by water, today is a great example of how fast water can move. Today is Sunday. I'm in school recording this, and driving into school, I actually saw some flood water. And so when it's talking about sediments are deposited usually by water, when you have big rushing amounts of water, you're going to get more sediments usually in a location that it's normally not going to go. Okay. And then as it settles, as the water recedes and starts to settle, then that's where you're going to start to build up. Okay. Let's see here. So my next slide is, okay. Now this, you're going to have this glued into your book, but we have the deposition part. This is where the particles are all very loose. It's not really going to, at this stage, it is not compacting to make a layer. But when you look at the sedimentation part, you're able to see specific layers in the rocks. Okay. We have our third process. This is where it's compacting. Okay. Now on here, it doesn't have listed what it is, but there's a handout for you guys that we're going to glue into our notebooks that actually has this process on here. And this is where it's going to start compacting all of the stuff together. Okay. Then we have cementation. That is where you're going to have your final layers of your rock put together. So it's kind of loose particles. They lay down together. They start to push down, and the cementation, your keyword there is cement. It means it's not going to move any farther. Okay. This is going to, it's not going to be able to be broken up easily. This is where you're going to continue as sediments are deposited. This is where your rocks continue to grow. And it kind of shows the pieces at the bottom here, like the loose particles. And then here's your picture of what it looks like when it's moving, when it's starting to lay down, when it's beginning to be pressurized, and then when it is cemented, what it looks like. All right, slide number 24 talks more, again, with the rock layers. Sedimentary rocks provide a history of the evolution of Earth. This shows us both how water has moved, it shows how sediments have moved, and it shows how things have been compacted together. And then our slide says when sediments are deposited and compacted to form sedimentary rock, sediments are accumulated in beds, one on top of another in layers. And we see an example right here. This means that when you cut deep into the crust, you're going to see different layers that have formed over time. So whatever it is that we see, and this is looking back at the YouTube video again, whatever type of rocks that we see, that's a small piece of the process that is actually above ground. Okay, so if you're digging into the Earth's crust, we're kind of at the top layer of everything that's underneath. So as the both the paleontologists and geologists and archaeologists, these are different people who search and study different parts of just Earth or anything that's below the ground. As they continue to dig, they're going to see different layers. Okay, it's kind of like the Earth is continuing to get a little bit taller, if you will. All right, so slide number 25. Number 20. Excuse me. So slide number 25 we just talked on. And then we have rock layers, and again, we have the law of superposition. When you look at the diagram, it's asking which layer is the oldest and which layer is the youngest. So if you're looking at this, if you think the oldest layer is the top layer up there by the grass, I want you to stand up. Okay, now you may sit down. If you think it is the bottom layer, go ahead, or the bottom one down here very low, if you think that is the oldest part of the underground, go ahead and stand up. Okay, now you may sit down. The oldest part is the one at the bottom. Okay, the bottom layers are the oldest part of the rock layers. The bottom is the oldest. The newest part is always at the top. This, you guys, this is called the law of superposition. This is an important thing for you to know. This is going to be on your test. Hint, hint, wink, wink. This is going to be on the test. Okay. So with the law of superposition, it's basically saying that your oldest layers are on the bottom, your newest layers are on the top. Because remember, with the sedimentometer, you're going to be building on top of a base. Okay. Kind of like Lego bricks. You have a base and then you build on top. Okay. All right. Slide number 26. Geologists study ancient sedimentary rocks to determine what environment they were formed in. Determining ancient events is important in understanding the history of the Earth. This helps geologists understand how Earth's surface has changed over time. Remember, guys, as I said, it also lets the geologists know what the weather was like, if there was rainy seasons or a lot of flooding or a lot of dry time. It helps them know that. So one way to study this is to compare the sedimentary structures in ancient rocks with sedimentary structures in modern environments. Okay, so this is why it's important for them to dig deep to find some things to study in order to have it studied with what we're able to see on top of the Earth's crust, which is where we are. I know this is a pretty quick overview of rock layers, and I apologize for not being there to do this live with you guys, but I wanted to make sure that I hit on the key points that you need to know. There's a couple of questions that I'm going to have you answer tomorrow in Google Classroom. I'm going to create a form to see what you learned from today, just to make sure there's nothing I need to go back over and hit on before we move into the next part. I do have your study guides ready for you. I will give those out to you tomorrow. So tomorrow you're going to have your study guides. We will be filling out everything in it up until today, which for you is Monday, not today, Sunday, but for you. So we will cover the Earth's crust, Earth layers. We will also cover rock layers and the law of superposition. So I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon, and I will see you guys tomorrow.